Hello, everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today we are going to look at the pastoral epistles. The books of 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus is the 15th, 16th, and 17th book of the New Testament. The New Testament has 5 sections: the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Pauline epistles, the general epistles, and the book of Revelation. The Gospels contain the life, ministry, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Acts of the Apostles give a historical account of the growth and spread of the Christian church. The Pauline epistles are a collection of letters written by Paul to different churches during his time. The general epistles are letters written by other leaders such as Peter, John, and Jude to different churches. And finally, the book of Revelation gives a picture of how the story of the world will end with Jesus returning to earth to restore it and reign on it. The books of 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus is a part of the Pauline epistles section of the New Testament and are often referred to as the pastoral epistles. Let me go over the historical context of the pastoral epistles. Now, Timothy was a younger colleague of Paul, whom the apostle probably met on his first missionary journey in Acts chapter 13 to 14. Paul frequently referenced Timothy in his other letters, which may indicate that Paul is the one who led him to faith. Paul has called Timothy his son, indicating the great care he has for him. We see how Paul valued Timothy when he sends him on several important ministry assignments. He mentions in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 verses 1 through 10 how he sent Timothy to the church in Thessalonica to encourage them while they faced persecution. Following this assignment, Paul sent Timothy to Corinth to remind the Christians there of Paul's teachings. He later sent Timothy to Macedonia and to make a special visit to the church in Philippi. When Paul wrote 1st and 2nd Timothy, Timothy was in Ephesus on special assignment by Paul. Although we know much about Timothy, we don't know too much about Titus. Titus is not mentioned in the book of Acts and is mentioned mainly in 2 Corinthians with a few other mentions in other letters. Paul calls Titus a true son, which may suggest that Paul also led him to faith. We do know that Titus was a Gentile and Paul refused to have him circumcised when he fought against the Judaizers. Most of the assignments Paul gave to Titus revolved around the problems at Corinth. He successfully delivered Paul's writings to the Corinthians such that they responded positively to Paul. Later, Paul sent Titus to Corinth to collect an offering for the Jerusalem believers. Then we see Paul leave Titus behind as a pastor in Crete until he will be replaced by Artemis. Now that we know the recipients of Paul's pastoral letters, let's look at when Paul wrote these letters. During Paul's first imprisonment in AD 61 to 63, he wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. When Paul was free from prison, he wrote 1st Timothy and Titus. Then when he was arrested again in AD 65 to 66, he wrote 2nd Timothy, and then he was martyred. So based on this timeline, it seems that Paul had left Titus in Crete to finish pastoring new churches he planted there. Then Paul went with Timothy to Ephesus and then left him behind when he went on to Macedonia. It is there he wrote the book of 1 Timothy in order to give further instructions, and then thought of Titus in Crete, leading him to write the book of Titus. The purpose for the book of 1 Timothy seems to be Paul fighting against the rise of false doctrine that was developing in Ephesus. Paul points out 2 people in 1 Timothy chapter 1 verses 18 through 20 who were spreading false doctrine, namely Hymenaeus and Alexander. Paul's statements in 1 Timothy provide information on the nature of the false teaching and false teachers. The false teachers were Jewish and taught people to continue to uphold the Mosaic law, including dietary restrictions. These false teachers taught believers to not get married and hate their physical bodies. Paul's writing in the book of Titus is like 1 Timothy, but a lot shorter. Like in Ephesus, there seems to be evidence of false teaching in Crete. However, the threat seems less urgent based on Paul's language. In 1 Timothy, Paul tells him to fight the good fight, but that type of language is absent in Titus. Paul described the false teachings in Crete in Titus chapter 1 verses 10 through 16 and Titus chapter 3 verses 9 through 11. So Paul writes this letter to Titus to appoint and train new elders to correct the false teachers. By the time we get to 2 Timothy, the tone is very different. Keep in mind that time has passed and Paul has been arrested again. He has already gone through a preliminary hearing and expects to be executed soon. Paul had been treated with generosity by some while he was betrayed by others. He was lonely because most of his close friends had left for specific ministries, and the problem in the church at Ephesus had worsened. There were many who have left the Christian faith. Even though Hymenaeus had been excommunicated by this point, he continued to spread false teaching. So you can imagine the heavy burden Paul had on his heart. Although he had done so much work, there was so much work to be done. With his final moments on earth, Paul focuses his attention on Timothy. He appeals to Timothy to stay faithful to everything he had taught him. Why? Because everything Paul taught him was about being loyal to Christ. So Paul did not want Timothy to just focus on defeating the false teachers, but more importantly, to pass down the truth of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, to faithful, committed followers of Christ. Paul wanted to come to his side as soon as he can, knowing his time was coming to an end. In other words, Paul was preparing Timothy to carry on the work of Christ after he has gone. The pastoral letters give us a glimpse into the difficulty of ministry. We see heresy, divisiveness, and leadership difficulties. The pastoral letters does not sugarcoat reality, but gives an accurate picture of both the beauty and the ugliness of church ministry. Despite all the darkness surrounding Paul, he knew that the power of God will overcome all human shortcomings. Paul continued to hope in God's divine work in the lives of his people, even until his dying breath. And that is the same attitude those leading God's church today must preserve. Thank you to today's sponsor, Awe Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the books of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. And until next time, see you.